Hello, and welcome to the TechZero Python Learning course. In this video, we're going to be covering if statements. If statements are the very basic bits of how you can create a flow control for your program. You can create branching paths depending on what sort of conditions you set up with them. An if statement contains one or more other statements, and those statements will only execute if the condition in the if statement is met. So in order to make an if statement, you simply say if, let's say A is less than B, and then you set a colon there. And at least in Spyder, it'll auto indent for you. Remember that in Python, you need to use indentation in order to denote blocks of code. And we'll just say in here, let's say C is equal to A plus B and then print out C. Just to demonstrate we can have multiple lines with an if statement and those will all work just fine. We'll get C being A plus B prints out as 8. But if we make that A is greater than B, we get nothing. The condition in the if statement isn't met, and therefore the code within it is not run. The logical statements that you can use in the condition of an if statement are basically what you'd expect. You have your is equal to, so let's say A is equal to B. Note the double equal sign. If you use a single equal sign, it'll think you're trying to assign something, and then you're going to have a problem. You have not equal to. A is exclamation point equal to B. That will run if they are not equal. We can check that here. If A equal to B, run, does not. If we say A not equal to B, it'll run. You have your less than, you have your less than or equal to, you have your greater than, and your greater than equal to. And you can use these to compare variables or values or whatever in the condition portion of the if statement. Basically, whatever is following the if keyword itself and before the colon. Now, if you make an empty if statement, it'll actually throw an error. If you need to set up a bunch of if statements and you don't want to fill out the contents of them as you're writing out the conditions, you can just use the pass command and that will do nothing. But it'll stop it from throwing an error, which is occasionally useful. You can also have an if statement within if statements. So we say if A is not equal to B, if A is less than B, print less than. If A is greater than B, if we want this to be there, print greater than. And we'll see that A is currently less than B, so that'll work. If we set A to 8, it'll print out greater than. Now, if you have multiple exclusive conditions like this, for example, A can't be less than B and greater than B, so one of these two will have to. Instead of using just two if statements, you want to use elif. Elif is short for else if. And that way, when the interpreter is going through it, if one of the sequence of if and else if statements checks out, it will skip the checking of all other subsequent elif statements. Now, let's say you have a bunch of different things and you want to have a catch-all at the end. If none of your if statements or else if statements goes through, then you just use the else keyword. The statements in an else statement will run only if all preceding if and else if statements fail. So we'll say print, I guess it's equal. And we'll just take out this upper level if statement. So now we have three mutually exclusive conditions here. We have A being less than, greater than, or equal to B. And we don't need to explicitly set up this being an elif for A equal to B, because if it's not less than or it's not greater than, it has to be equal to B. So for argument's sake, we'll do that. And we'll see that because A isn't less than and A isn't greater than, we get, I guess it's equal. Now let's say you wanted to check multiple conditions at the same time. You could, if you wanted to, do something like this. You can nest an if statement in here that says if A is less than 10, print, it doesn't matter, print yes. We'll set A equal to 3 again, so both of these will run, and we'll see that both if statements check out. But if you wanted to do both of these conditions in one line without having to have this unnecessary nesting here, you can use the and keyword. Simply just type and between it. If A is less than B and A is less than 10, that still works. If you want to check that at least one of two or more conditions is true, you can use the OR. So we'll say A is less than B, or A is less than 2. And we'll see that this will still go through, even though this condition fails. One of the two, A less than B or A less than 2, does return true, and we get our if statement executing. Now you can have multiple ORs or ANDs in a row if you want. You can use parentheses to say, let's say we want that. Let's say and B is greater than 3. And we'll see that will also run. That's because we can break these into blocks. We can say this is one block here, this whole thing needs to return true, and this needs to return true. The conditions contained in these parentheses will return true if one of the two of them returns true, in this case A less than B. So since this parenthetical returns true and B is greater than 3, this print statement will run. Additionally, you don't necessarily need to use a comparison in an if statement condition. You can also just stick a variable and say if A, print yes. And we'll see that it does. Let's say we have a string that is names equal to Josh. If name, yes will print. That is because you can use any non-zero number or any non-empty string, and that will technically evaluate to true. A 0 or an empty string will evaluate to false. So if we empty this out and we set A is equal to 0, and we'll set an else here to print no. If name is currently empty string, we get no. If A, which is equal to 0, we get no. This can be useful if you want to make sure that something successfully went through in your code. So let's say you have an assignment that's attempting something and there's a chance that it fails and you end up with like an empty string. You can say if name, like this, if you were trying to get someone's name, or let's say you're reading in from the console and the person presses enter without submitting anything, and it doesn't come through. If you say if name, that will fail. And if they did successfully submit something, then it'll go through.